Everyone. Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Welcome everybody. Welcome back. Tzurba Rabbanan, volume 17. Working our way through. And last week there was no shiur, but 2 weeks ago we were talking about Havdalah. It occurred to me last night as I was walking home from shul that Havdalah, I think in this period we feel it ever so strongly. It's Motzei Shabbat, the transition from This is now the two quoting Rabbeinu Ephraim. He says, Misha eno mareach umavarech ala psamim avei bracha levatala. If you cannot smell, and you then say the bracha on smell, that is a bracha levatala. Okay, that sounds obvious. What's the kiddush? The afloti b'nei beito eno yachol. Not only can you, obviously, you can't say the bracha for yourself. In the same way, if we're dealing with a brekata nehemin, seems to be brekata nehemin, the brachot of when one gets benefit, enjoyment, physical pleasure in the world, right? So the same way, you aren't going to eat something, you can't say the bracha on that. If you're not going to, you can't smell, you can't say the bracha. Not only can you not say the bracha, but you cannot say the bracha on behalf of others. Says Rabbeinu Ephraim, This is not the same as, for example, the Bracha of Kiddush or the Bracha of Havdalah, where we know somebody who has fulfilled the mitzvah or somebody who's not going to drink and say the Bracha on behalf of others, because that is a Birkat mitzvah. Same thing with Birkat Motzi Shal Mitzvah. What is a Motzi Shal Mitzvah? That is by Seder night, for example, where there's an obligation to eat matzah. These are an obligation. Aval Zeh, relating to this Bracha of Brahim and Ebesamim, this is just a custom. That is the position of Rabbeinu Ephraim. Says the Tur, now in bold, he says, Lo Nehira. It seems to me this is incorrect. Right, he says you have a case whereby a person could cut a piece of bread, recite the bracha for others, even if one is not eating with them, and even though there is not an absolute obligation. So we have here in Machloket, we have the Rabbeinu Ephraim says the one who cannot smell may not say the bracha of Brei Minei B'Samim for others. And the two, quoting in the name of his father, the Rosh as well, says, no, you can, even though you yourself cannot smell, you can discharge others of their obligation. It's part of the mitzvah of Havdalah. That is the Machloket. Now, the Beit Yosef disagrees here with the Torah. Again, he supports the first position. And he says as follows, the case there, which the Torah was quoting, where he said one can say the bracha on a piece of bread for one's household, even though one is not going to eat. There, what is the case? What's the Gemara talking about? Talking about din chinuch. Talking about when you have children, they don't know how to say the bracha, so you can say the bracha for them and teach them in that way. And that is how he quotes. That's the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. That's how it concludes. It says, "Kedei lechem chan v'mitzvot v'chinuch lo shayach ela b'tanim." That is how he understands that case. Over the page, it says, why? If it was not dealing with chinuch, if it was just saying you would say the bracha for somebody else, it wouldn't say b'nei beit Torah. It wouldn't say one's household. It would say for someone else. You go and look inside that Gemara as well. So we're out of books. You're going to have to sit next to somebody and share the text. Right? Generally speaking, we wouldn't say the bracha for somebody else unless you're going to eat with them, right? This is when we're dealing with the bracha of hamotzi lechem in Haaretz. This is a bracha on food. Birkot hane'anim. Unlike birkot mitzvot, we spoke in Shavuot morning. Those were here. Those who managed to stay awake. I wouldn't have if I wasn't speaking. But we spoke about brachot, the different types of brachot that we say, and some that are more common and less common. But when we have a birkat mitzvah, bracha that we say we're performing a mitzvah, that bracha you can say as many times as you want, as many times as you want. But if you're doing the mitzvah for somebody else, that's a kiddush, was the example. I fulfilled my obligation of kiddush. I am, for all intents and purposes, not going to be drinking now, right? Sometimes you have people who go around in the hospitals, for example. If somebody goes around all the wards in the hospitals, says kiddush 50 times, right? Even though for 49 out of those 50 times, he is not fulfilling his obligation of kiddush. That's fine. You're fulfilling somebody else's obligation. I can say the bracha for them.
Presumably, if I got the bracha from in between, right? You can't just say 50 times if you say bracha over and over again.
There's a question if he's even the one drinking, or if it even helps if he's drinking, or somebody else is drinking. Okay, the setup. But that's the general principle is birkat mitzvot. But birkat ne'anim, right? Somebody sitting next to me and wants to eat a chocolate bar, and I'm not eating a chocolate bar. I can't say a shakol for that. If I'm eating as well, then I can say that. The exception to that, you'll see over here in the footnotes, go back to page 217 at the bottom. This is what the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says, that I think it was brought here.
Yeah, it's not a part of it.
Right, for I'm told the Gemara point says, although usually one is already recited a bracha may appear on behalf of others, does not apply to birkot ne'anim, such as birkot over bread and wine. When birkot ne'anim are recited over mitzvot, such as the bracha over wine of kiddush and the matzah, the first night of Pesach, one may recite the bracha on behalf of others. Right, so that's the exception. That over there, although it's a birkat hane'anim, but because the eating and drinking there is a bona fide mitzvah. But generally speaking, I can't say birkat hane'anim on behalf of somebody else if I am not benefiting, not personally benefiting. So that's the question now. When we say the bracha of Borei Minei B'Samim, blessing over spices at Havdalah, how do we view it? If I view it as this is a Birkat HaNe'anim, essentially, as we said, this is a non-essential part of Havdalah. This is an addendum to the Havdalah. The proof of that is, if I don't have spices, I still make Havdalah, right? If I view it in that way, and then it's just a Birkat HaNe'anim, then if I can't smell, I can't say the bracha. On the other hand, if I say, no, it's a mitzvah, and it's part of the Birkat HaMitzvah, what difference does it make? If you can smell or not, you can destroy it, obviously, obligation. So that is precisely the argument that we see here. The Rabbeinu Ephraim seems to take the position that one cannot say the bracha at all, and the Tur, in the name of the Rosh, says that no, you can say it on behalf of others, Birkat HaMitzvah. The Beit Yosef, right, supports Rabbeinu Ephraim against the Tur. He says, no, you cannot, he says,
It's not the truth.
right? He says it's not. He says the proof of the Torah is wrong. So over here, source number 34, which is the continuation of the Beit Yosef. He says like this: Mikom makom, if shar lekayem ha'at harosh, the afal gav the eno chova kevan shechamim kavu oto minhag havalei mitzvah. So maybe we will say nonetheless. Maybe we'll say nonetheless that, although it's not a chovah, not an absolute obligation, it's still a mitzvah, more than just a minhag. So maybe at the end of the day, I do say that it's similar to the bracha of hamotzi when it's a mitzvah. That's to justify the rosh. The Abbot of Shulchan Aruch now, source number 35, he says, bottom line, Misha eno mareh, eino mevarech al b'samim. So certainly, one who cannot smell would not say the bracha of b'samim for themselves. אלא אם כן התכוון להוציא בני ביתו הקטנים שהגיעו לחינוך, או להוציא מי שאינו יודע. However, if it is to satisfy for somebody who is to satisfy somebody else's obligation, then one could make the bracha. So that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Many of the Achronim do not accept it, do not agree with this leniency of the Shulchan Aruch. Like the Taz over here says no. The Magen Avraham also says, let's see the Magen Avraham, source number 37. He says, Sarich Niyom, דע כתוב בסימן קס"ז, ואפילו בשבת שכב לאכול פת, לא יברך לחברו, וטעמו משום דלא הווה אלא להנאתו. Right, he says that even when it comes to bread on Shabbat, one shouldn't say the bracha for somebody else unless you're going to eat. Because שכן כאן, דלא הווה אלא להשיב נפשו יתרה. In other words, it says that the samim, at the end of the day, even though it's part of the mitzvah of Havdalah, it's not an absolute obligation. Unlike the wine, right, which if I don't have a course to make Havdalah over, I can't make Havdalah. The spices are something extra, that is to comfort the additional soul, the additional part of the soul that is leaving, again, whatever that means. The answer meaning, if you're in a situation where it's very, very difficult for you you're a soldier in Gaza right now, okay, and you have 2 minutes to do the Havdalah before you have to go back into the action, okay, you're not going to waste your time now going around and looking for spices. You have whatever drink it is, and understand. And therefore, he said, if you can't smell, you don't say the bracha. You don't say the bracha, not for you and not for others. So Mishnah Berurah, just maybe sum up the sugya, and he brings in a few other details regarding the various brachot of Havdalah. These are quite common questions. Source number 38. Look at page 220. Okay. מי שהבדיל כבר ויש לו חוש הריאה, הוא בירך על הבשמים, הוא בא להבדיל פעם אחרת בשביל אחרים. Okay, so let's say the other cases, a person's already made, like we said, we spoke about Kiddush. You can go around doing Kiddush for different people. Havdalah, you can go around doing for different people as well. Let's say our individual who's volunteering in the hospital, this week he was at home for Kiddush, but he's now going to do a Havdalah for everybody in the hospital. So, he says, even though you've already made Havdalah once, this is talking about a person who can smell, and you've already said the bracha al b'samim, you now you come to do Havdalah on behalf of others, or you do Havdalah al shul, and then you do Havdalah home, whatever it is. Yariach od ve'atzmo pa'am acheret, k'dei she'yochal od hapa'am levarech borei minei b'samim. He says you can say the bracha again. You should smell the spices again this time, so that you are certainly that your bracha is not levatala, but that would apply to others as well. And now he says v'da. The mashin nagim ezen hashim she'eno tzin yatzet b'rukat haneva b'samim shomem abdir mevarchin oten le'atzmo. Sometimes people don't want to be, right? You don't want to just say amen to somebody else's bracha. I want to make my own. Right? So I'm here, somebody is saying Havdalah. So obviously the person who's saying Havdalah, they've got the course, they're going to drink, they say the bracha of Havdalah, they say those brachot themselves, and I'll answer on them. But the bracha of the Ner and the bracha of the Samim, so some people want to say those brachot themselves rather than answer on them. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is not a good practice. Don't do this. He says, because what's the problem? Two issues. He says, B'sha'ah she'omer ha'mevarech b'kat ha'mavdil. So he says, Shelo kadin hem osim. This is incorrect. Dekevat shem yotzim b'avdalah, tzrachin lahatot oznam v'lishma b'kat ha'avdalah. Because you are having your obligation of Havdalah fulfilled with somebody else's bracha, you need to lahatot oznam. You have to literally tilt your ear. You need to listen. You need to listen to what they're saying. You need to make sure you hear their bracha. So you're going to say your bracha at the same time. You're saying now, right? You're standing at the back, and now you've come to the front, and you're saying the B'rei Minei B'samim at the same time that the Chazan is saying the Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol. I mean, you haven't benefited anything because you've now missed the bracha of Havdalah, which was the more critical one to hear. Aside from that, mitzvah yoter latzet kulam b'birkato. It's better that everybody should be yotze the bracha that the one who's saying makes it. The barov am hadrat melech. It's a principle we have, right? That the king's glory is in the multitude of people from the pasuk in Mishlei, and more people are shaykh to the same bracha. That's a great. That's why on the Friday night or the Shabbat meal, it's just the balabait will say kiddush. The balabait will say hamotzi lechem. Technically, every single person sitting around the table could say hamotzi when they get their bread. Aside from use of lechem mishnah, etc. But barov amadat melech, one person says the bracha for everybody, and that's fine. And that's better rather than everybody saying the bracha by themselves. By the way, another place where this comes up sometimes is on Rosh Hashanah with Tzkiat Shofar. So now with Tzkiat Shofar, there are a lot of details. The one who blows the shofar says the bracha of Lishma Kol Shofar. Everybody says Amen, and everybody fulfills their obligation to them. But what if a person, sometimes women, sometimes men as well, was not there at the beginning of the Tzkiot? You only came later, so you weren't there when the bracha was said. Right? So there, the mitzvah is to hear. So every person who's hearing the shofar is fulfilling their obligation. If I wasn't there at the beginning when the shofar said the bracha, I should say the bracha now before he begins to blow. Again, if it's going to be, but one has to be careful because you can't say the bracha too early, and you can't say the bracha if you start saying the bracha and the person starts blowing the shofar. So now I don't hear the beginning of the note because I'm saying the bracha. That's a problem. So the person has to time it right, and better if it's a safek. But not to say the bracha, use the bracha in that case, but to make sure that you hear the tzkiya. If you all come on time and you hear the tzkiya say the bracha, so then there's no question. As I'm sure in this great message, everybody comes on time. That's not okay. He then says in Mishnah Berurah, another point. He says, what happens? We'll get to the bracha B'rei Eish in a bit more detail. But what if you're very far away from the light, from the candle, and you can't benefit from the candle? So then, and then you really have not you've not fulfilled the obligation of that bracha of B'rei Eish. And then sorry. In that case, you should have in mind not to be included in that bracha. You can go later on and you can see the candle and say that bracha. Okay, so bottom line is, what is the practice? If, like in the case of our friend who cannot smell, somebody has COVID or whatever and temporarily is unable to smell, as we've seen, there is a machloket here, whether they can say the bracha on behalf of others. So what should you do practically? So say Poske's Manani, I'll put Yosef number 39. He says, Misha eno maria, eino mevarech alav samim. Somebody who cannot smell should not say the bracha of the samim. V'lachen, b'mkom shebal habayit eno chesh b'tov. If he's not feeling well or whatever, he's unable to smell. Yevarech al hayayin v'lanev yavdil. So says the Yalkut Yosef, you should therefore skip that bracha, say the rest of Havdalah, and then after Havdalah, Yivachu b'nei habayit alav samim v'yarechu. After Havdalah, he says the other members of the household can then say the bracha over the spices. Shmat Shabbat Kilchata says differently. He says, no, don't change the order. Say the bracha of Borei Minei Psamim at its proper place in Havdalah. But the one who's making up the Balabait, who's making up the Havdalah, should pause, allow somebody else to say Borei Minei Psamim, and then carry on. Okay. So that is the bracha of the spices. We then also have the bracha of the fire, Borei Morei Ha'esh, top of page 222. So source number 41, we have the Gemara Pesachim that tells us, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Ein melachin al ela b'motzei Shabbat. Why do we have the bracha of Borei Morei Ha'esh, the bracha of the fire on Motzei Shabbat? And the answer is, O'el v'tchilat b'yatol. This is the time when fire was created, when it was discovered, when Adam Rishon. There's a different Geshaot, different Midrashim, exactly how fire came into the world. Was it that Hashem gave Adam the ability to create fire, or that he saw the fire, but it was created by Hashem? Either way, but it was on Motzei Shabbat. So says here the Gemara, Motzei Shabbat Natan HaKadosh Baruch Hu De'ah B'Adam Rishon Me'en Dugma Shamara. Right, that Hashem granted Adam Rishon the ability to produce fire on Motzei Shabbat. And therefore, the reason that is why we have the bracha of Borei Morei Ha'esh of a fire on Motzei Shabbat. Now on Motzei Shabbat, as opposed to on Motzei Yom Tov. Right? On Yom Tov, when we perform Havdalah, we don't have the bracha of Borei Morei Ha'esh. Now the continuation of the Gemara discusses that there is actually another reason. There's another reason why we have the bracha Morei Ha'esh. Not just the fact that it was created on Motzei Shabbat, because there are lots of things that were created at different times. Right? If we don't find that we go through the week, and on each day and each time, and a certain substance was created, that we go and we say the bracha, say the bracha fish on the fifth day, whatever it is. We don't find that, but it's also because fire, right, could not be used on Shabbat, or could not be lit on Shabbat. Obviously, we can use fire in the sense that if you have a pre-existing, you light candles before Shabbat, you can benefit from the light. You're required to benefit from the light. You have fire before Shabbat, and in permitted ways, you can use that to heat up your food, but you're required to heat up your food. You'll see when we get to those of Bishul, that's coming up soon. And once we finish this, the next topic is a bit of an introduction into the Melachot of Shabbat. And after that, the first Melacha, which we're going to study in depth, is Bishul, cooking, because this comes up all the time, many laws. But it's broad, right, that there were, for example, the Pasuk says, that don't light fire throughout all of your dwellings on Shabbat. And famously, the Karaim, those who deny the oral law, said that what does this mean? It says that you should not have fire lit in your house on Shabbat. So they would sit in the dark and they would eat cold food, because that is what they held. So in order to show that we are not Karaim, it's very, very important that we have hot food on Shabbat. That's why one of the reasons the minhag to cholent on Shabbat morning. It's not just because we're hungry, but it's something very, very significant. I remember there was somebody I used to once I was a guest in somebody's home. They didn't have cholent on the Shabbos morning. They had cold food, whatever, and they brought out tea at the end of the meal, and they said, "Here's the cholent." Right? They weren't kidding. There was a serious thing. They brought out hot water because we're worried if we don't eat anything hot, we don't that people will suspect us, that we don't believe that we can heat up food, and therefore they might suspect us of being Karaim. Nowadays, I'm not sure how many people you suspect them Karaim, but anyway, that's a spectrum of other things. We all suspect that. Anyway, we'll stop it. But the point is that there are certain conditions, right? When can food be heated up, and how can it be heated up, and what sort of fire? Is it covered flame, not covered flame? We'll get into all of those details, don't worry. That we'll get into, and I think we'll be speaking about that for many, many weeks. I think there are 3 shiurim in the Tzurba Marabanan series on Bishul. Going by the past average, it normally takes us 2 to 3 shiurim to cover each one. So we've got a good couple of months to talk about Bishul. Lots of practical and fun questions we've come up with. In any event, how do we get onto that? Fire. So you cannot light fire on Shabbat, as opposed to Yom Tov, where it is permitted to transfer a flame. From the Torah, according to most opinions, from the Torah, it would have been permitted to light a new flame on Yom Tov. Midrabanan, we don't do it. There's a quick push for the Gemara share. We're going to get to that soon as well. That comes up in Sefer Beitzah, that we don't light a new fire in Yom Tov, but we can transfer fire from a pre-existing flame. Okay, and therefore there is no inyan of Borei Morei Ha'esh on Yom Tov as well. So these are the two reasons that we have on Shabbat. Also the fact that fire was created on Motzei Shabbat, and also the fact that on Shabbat itself, you were not allowed to create fire, and therefore to mark that distinction on Motzei Shabbat, we say the bracha b'ra'ah. The nafkamina between these two reasons comes up on Motzei Yom Kippur, because on Motzei Yom Kippur, that is not Motzei Shabbat, so it's not the time when fire was created, but the fact that you couldn't use the fire, you couldn't light fire on Yom Kippur, and that is why for Havdalah of Motzei Yom Kippur we need a Ner Shel Shabbat. Means you have to have a candle that was lit from before Yom Kippur, a candle that was lit on Yom Kippur itself, so that we can tell the difference, whether we can distinguish that on Yom Kippur I couldn't do anything with this fire. Now, Motzei Yom Kippur I can. On Shabbat, there is no requirement for an Ner Shel Shabbat. And what happens if you don't have the candle on Motzei Yom Kippur? Which often happens, the candle went out, something happened. Spoiler, 24-hour candles not really 24 hours. They got less. Use the 48-hour candle. Okay, that way you know for sure you'll have. But if you don't have a candle, then it's a problem. When Shabbat and Yom Kippur coincide, then there's no issue, because then you could use the candle that you could use for Motzei Shabbat, you could use for Motzei Kippur. But so that is Borei Moreash. Again, we don't need a Ner Shel Shabbat for Motzei Shabbat, but we do need a candle. Now, source number 44, the Gemara here in Pesachim talks about what kind of candle you need to use. It says, Kimat el-Abdul leikam shmayeh v'adlik avuka mishraga. The time came to recite Havdalah, and Rabbi Zaten got up and he lit a torch from a candle. So Amalei lama lach kulehai, why do you have this big flame? Why do you need this? And Haman Shashraga said, you have the candle, that was enough. So he said, Amalei shama midate b'naf she'ekabi. That's what the attendant, that's what he did on his own accord. If I hadn't heard it, I wouldn't have done it. So you have this machloket, this discussion. Just don't you think that a torch essentially means that it's more than one wick and it's a greater fire? Is that not a mitzvah min hamukha? And that is the way that we paskin, that we use we don't really have so many other sources here in the book, but we use a candle which is not just one wick, but is a number of wicks that are held together. If one doesn't have, why is it? Why is that necessary? Probably because that's a greater flame. It shows the variation in the flame from the different wicks. But for the effort, certainly one wick would suffice as well. Sometimes people hold different candles together. If you don't have that, also that's another possibility. And then another question is mentioned before. The discussion we saw machloket whether it was a birkat mitzvah or a birkat ne'anim, which is how we class it, is it an absolute obligation or not. We find a similar discussion by Borei Moreash. What is the nature of the bracha of Borei Moreash? Is it a birkat mitzvah or is it a birkat ne'anim? We're getting benefit from the candle. The nafkamina between them might be in terms of what we do with the candle. Many people have the custom to look one's fingernails in the light of the candle. Is that an absolute obligation? And when should one do that? Should one do that before saying those who look at the fingernails in the candle before saying the bracha, and there are those who look after saying the bracha? What's the difference? Where does it come from? Again, depends on the nature of the bracha. If we say that this is a birkat nehenim, I am saying a bracha over the fact that I get benefit from the light. So all birkat nehenim. Think about when you eat, you say the bracha first, and then you eat. You need to say the bracha before. I don't have license to get benefit from this world until I've thanked HaKadosh Baruch Hu and until I've said the bracha. So therefore, according to that svara, I would say that I would say the bracha first, and then I would look at my hand in the light of the candle. On the other hand, if we say that it is a birkat mitzvah, so maybe it would be the other way around. And the Mishnah over here, source number 45, we're at the top of page 224. So the Mishnah Brachot says, says you don't say the bracha of the candle until you're going to derive some benefit from the light. The Gemara explains that it doesn't mean necessarily that you derive benefit, but that you're standing close enough that you're able to derive benefit. The Gemara then says, what does it mean to derive benefit? It says, if you look at the second paragraph in source 46, so the two different types of coins. if you're able to look at them and distinguish one from the other. And there's a Shulchan Aruch number 47. He says, you have to be able to derive a benefit from the light. דהיינו, שיש סמוך לו בכדי שיוכל להכיר בין מטבע מדינה זו למטבע מדינה אחרת. Be close enough to the lights that you can, through the light of the camera, you'll be able to tell the difference. That is why, by the way, some people have the custom, and it's not strictly required, some have the custom to turn the lights off, so that you're certainly deriving benefit from the candle. But again, that is a minhag which some have, not strictly required. What is required, though, is certainly the one who's saying the bracha needs to be close enough to the candle so that you are getting benefit from it. Source number 48, the Mordechai, he brings this minhag which we mentioned. He says, that which we look at our fingernails. As we saw in the Gemara, one needs to get some sort of benefit from the light. Meaning you can discern the shine of the light from the candle. There is this midrashic idea that the material of the fingernails, that was the way that Adam HaRishon was created, and again we saw that Havdalah relates to Adam HaRishon, the first time discovering fire. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch brings this, number 50. He says, there are those who look at the palms of the hands, or the fingernails. Says there are small. Okay, so this is just in terms of the procedure of how we do Havdalah. Okay, it gets a little bit tricky because Havdalah is done over the course. So you're holding the cup. Which hand do you hold the cup in? So we have a principle, comes to Brachot, we always hold the cup in the stronger hand. So for most people, that is the right hand. Interesting question which comes up. Anybody has left-handed? So, well, it's a very, very hard proportion. So if you're left-handed, which cup do you hold the cup? Which hand do you hold the cup in? Do you still hold it in the right hand, or do you move to the left hand? So it depends if you're Sephardi or Ashkenazi. According to the Sephardim, it's still in the right hand, but according to the Ashkenazim, it is one stronger hand. So therefore, an Ashkenazi makes kiddush to hold the cup in his left hand, or any item of food. Well, if you say a bracha, you will hold the food in the left hand first before saying the bracha. But here, so why does it get complicated? Because we start off Havdalah at the beginning, we're saying the bracha of Borei Pri Ha Yefer, but then I have Borei Minei B'Samim and Borei Morei Ha'esh, right? And then I have the bracha, I go back to Havdalah. So this is what the Ramah says. When he writes, Yesh lo Tipunei Yad Yamin, you have to look at the fingernails of your right hand, V'le'echoz HaKos B'Yad Small, and hold the cup in your left hand. In other words, according to Ashkenazim, you start off beginning by holding the cup in your stronger hand, right? Which is assuming what his right hand is. You're holding it in one's right hand. Then when you get to the other brachot, you would transfer the cup into your left hand, into your weak hand, and then use your stronger hand to say the bracha, to hold the spices and to look at the candle, and then you move it back. According to the Shulchan Aruch, that's not necessary. According to the Shulchan Aruch, you can just put the cup down there and say, right? But that is what the Ramah says. And he adds, יש לכפוף האצבעות לתוך היד, שאז רואה הציפורניים עם הכפות בבת אחת. Okay, if you bend your fingers into your hand, and you can see the nails and the hand together. Okay. There is a discussion which comes up now in the modern era. We spoke, I think, regarding Hadlakat Nerot, whether could one suffice with Hadlakat Nerot, lighting Shabbat candles with electric light. What about if one does not have a candle for Havdalah? Could one suffice over here with electric lights as well? So it's very interesting that going back a number of years, if you skip for a moment to page 229, so 229 is quoted at the end of the first paragraph, you'll see it says that once upon a time, Soloveitchik, I heard said about Rabbi Moshe Brzezinski, who would say Borei Morei Ha'esh on electricity to clarify that we are prohibited to use electricity on Shabbat. So the dafka was a minhag to use specifically an electric light for Havdalah. If you think about the fact that part of the reason why we have with the candle is to distinguish the fact that you weren't able to use it on Shabbat, and now you can, so that makes sense. However, nowadays this is far less prevalent and far more problematic for a number of reasons. First of all, I think nowadays everybody understands more or less that electricity is prohibited on Shabbat. There's a fascinating tshuvot, fascinating discussions. We'll get to it in later shiurim as well. But when electricity was first invented, it wasn't so clear to everybody. Not everybody understood. And there was many Sephardi poskim who allowed turning on electricity on Yom Tov. Until that changed, in Israel, Vadia was very influential, going against that minhag. But nowadays, I think you ask the person in the street who keeps Shabbat or doesn't keep Shabbat, what is Shabbat about? If you were to ask the average Chiloni, I hate to make generalizations, but ask the average person who's not so doesn't know, has not studied 39 Melachot of Shabbat in depth, and say, what can't you do on Shabbat? Most people will tell you can't use electricity. It's just right, and that's not incorrect. It's fascinating that many of the expressions, many of the applications of using electricity today on Shabbat may be Yisrei D'Rabbanan and not actually Yisrei D'Oraita. Again, we'll get on to that. But that is one point. But the second point is that specifically if we're thinking about lights and electric lights, is that there's been a in the last few years, the early poskim that talk about light bulbs, we're talking about incandescent light bulbs, which more or less are not used today. Nowadays, just about everything is LED, which works a completely different mechanism. And this is one of those cases where the technology and understanding of the technology is very important in terms of understanding its effect on halakha. An incandescent light bulb, the way it works is that you have a piece of metal inside, which gets extremely, extremely hot. And when that is heated, everybody knows, anybody's ever changed the light bulb, right? For those of us who are less comfortable with doing our handiwork around the house, etc., so LED lights are the best things ever, because when it's an incandescent light bulb, and right, what happens? The light bulb comes out, and nobody can remember, is the light on or off? So until you screw it back in, and inevitably it was on, and you burn your hand, and you take your hand away, and if you're lucky, you manage to screw the light bulb in all the way. If you're not lucky, then the light bulb falls and smashes into a million pieces. Okay, but with an LED, it doesn't actually heat up. It's a marvelous thing. Great invention for Shalom Bayit, isn't it? But that's so the incandescent light bulb, the piece of metal which goes red hot, that is, according to most poskim, that is considered fire. That is considered lighting fire. And therefore, both in terms of Melachot Shabbat, that would be an Isur D'Oraita. Everybody agrees. Turning on an incandescent light bulb is an Isur D'Oraita on Shabbat. However, and if we say it's Malacha and it's fire, then it's much more likely that in terms of Adlakat Neirot and in terms of Havdalah as well, that we would consider it as sufficient as fire. It's not the only factor, but it's a very, very significant factor. On the other hand, when we get to LED, so the poskim talked about neon and fluorescent beforehand, but certainly nowadays LED works in a completely different way. It doesn't work on heat. Anybody's interested in the physics of it, we'll talk about that later. But the point is that this is certainly not considered fire. According to all the poskim, an LED bulb is not considered fire, and therefore one would not be able to make Havdalah of the LED lights. Again, turning on, fascinating question. If you turn on an LED light bulb, what is the issue? Everybody agrees that it's asur. It's forbidden. Don't misquote me. Don't take account of context. You cannot turn your lights on in Shabbat. However, there are many. It would seem to be. It may still be an Isur D'Oraita. If it's an Isur D'Oraita, it would not be the Isur of not it. Like that edge. It may be Makeb Patish. It may be Boner. Etc. There are others who want to argue that it's actually an Isur D'Rabbanan. What everybody would agree as well is that now situations of the army, medical, cases which are maybe borderline, because nefesh, or we're not sure, where we're allowed to break Shabbat, we're required to break Shabbat. So then it's better the fact that it's an LED versus an incandescent light bulb. Okay, but there is another sugya here which comes into it. You see, source number 51, which talks about if you have a candle that's inside a lantern or inside glass, etc. There is discussion as to whether that can be used for Havdalah as well. So that also comes up in relation to this subject. The bottom line is that certainly LED lights we would not use for Havdalah. Incandescent light bulbs, again, the consensus of most poskim nowadays seems to be that it's better not to use them for Havdalah. If somebody is in a situation where they have no candle, so I bring one safer, he brings. But if somebody has no candle, but they have an incandescent light bulb, then b'shat tzchak we could rely on that, and you could say the bracha over there. I remember a case we had once in shul where it was, I think it was Motzei Yom Tov. There was no, must be Motzei Yom Tov, which was also Motzei Shabbat. All right, and there was not, because otherwise why would it be a candle? Exactly, just checking that everybody's been listening. But and there was no candle for whatever reason. We didn't have a candle, and the Gabayim came and asked us, "Can we just use the electronic light?" And the answer was no. Again, there would be other considerations in terms of if we're going to make Havdalah in shul, we're going to use the light, everybody's going to think they can go home and use the light, etc. Now, maybe the last detail regarding Havdalah, and we'll get to that as well if we have time, is regarding the position for Havdalah, meaning is this done standing or sitting? We saw when it comes to Kiddush, there are all sorts of opinions, right? When it comes to Kiddush, on the one hand, talking about Kiddush on Friday night, we're giving testimony, a dut about Shemayim Ba'aretz. When a person gives testimony in court, we stand up. On the other hand, in Kiddush, there is no Kiddush, you need to sit down. So that is why some people stand, some people sit, some people begin standing and then sit down, right? And Shabbat day, it's more prevalent to sit down. When it comes to Havdalah, what do we do? So Tosfot, source number 60, says, he says the fact that, so first of all, you see here, it seems to be a minhag to stand for Havdalah, but also says, why should we stand? Doesn't seem to make sense. Okay, he says if one person is making the bracha over wine, generally speaking, we said before, Barov Am Hadrat Melech. Okay, one person is saying a bracha for others, but think about when you go to a Shabbat meal and you're sitting down and everybody's saying Hamotzi, you're all together, you establish the fact that everybody is sitting together as part of the same meal by the fact that you're all sitting. Right? When you're all standing, he's about to going that way, he's going that way. We don't establish the in that way. So ask Tosfot, how is it that for Havdalah, you establish split by standing up? It doesn't make sense. He says, Shema Yeshlo Mashmi, Dok Shekovin Atman, Kedei Latzek B'dei Havdalah, Kabinami, Akula Milta. Maybe the fact that everybody's gathering together for Havdalah, that is sufficient, and that's considered that you are gathered together in that sense. So actually it's better, says Tosfot, you should sit down for Havdalah. Then it appears that by its form we can exempt them. The Kolbo, on the other hand, another one of the Rishonim, just on source number 61, says, it's great to honor, it's great to respect. The same way, Kiddush is giving testimony, Havdalah, Kvod HaMelech, that we should stand up. So it says, Shulchan Aruch, Omer Havdalah Miyushav, that you say Havdalah sitting down, that is the Sephardi custom. It says, Ramah, V'yesh Omrim, Me'umad. That is our custom in these countries. I once heard somebody saying in jest that one of the differences between Ashkenazi and Sephardi shul is that you go to an Ashkenazi shul and it's quite nice, but you have wooden benches, you sit down, the chairs are not particularly comfortable. You go to a Sephardi shul, everybody's sitting like a king, you have very comfortable. Why? Because the Sephardim sit down a lot more. The Ashkenazim, we're standing most of the time anyway, so when we sit, we can manage. But there was it was a joke, but there's something to it. In any event, that is what we see for Havdalah. The Sephardi, the Shulchan Aruch says that you sit, the Ramah says that you stand. However, the Mishnah Berurah points out, and others nonetheless, that when one drinks the wine, then one should sit. Okay, Rabbi Vadia, maybe just see, source number 63, is Rabbi Vadia, says, שבאמת, מה שצריכה תוספות לזה, משום שהיינו נוהגים השומעים מתום מכוס התורה לחיבוב המצווה. He says that it makes sense, what we saw the machlok between Tosfot and the Kolbo. Again, when as I was reading the Tosfot, you might have been wondering to yourself, when he says, how do we all establish ourselves together? He says, there's only one person drinking, what's the big deal? When we say we need to establish ourselves together, so everybody sits, and one person says the bracha, and everybody partakes the food. So it says, maybe that's what Tosfot was talking about. Maybe in that case, with a cup of Havdalah, just like we do with Kiddush, the cup of Havdalah was passed around, and everybody drinks, and everybody has a sip. So when you say the bracha, break bragafen, to laugh with everybody, it makes more sense. You need to sit. And then he says, it's now in bold, the person saying Havdalah drinks the whole cup themselves, and nobody else needs to drink. Well, then there's not an issue that he can stand. And then he said, I'm just skipping the part now, which is in bold. He says, even the Katchila, one still fulfills the obligation of Havdalah while standing. Going to Shofar, Mikam Megillah, right? In other words, even though, according to Shulchan Aruch, one should sit, if one stood, one doesn't have to do Havdalah again, one should fulfill the mitzvah. Interesting that the Gemara actually says Havdalah Miyushav as well. That's brought out from Ma'aseh Rav. He's generally held to be authoritative in terms of the practices of the Vilna Gaon. Okay, last point to make. We have a few more minutes in terms of Melava Malka. Okay, there is a custom which some people have. In the winter, it's a lot easier. In the summer, we always talk about. In the winter, it's very, very difficult to find a time for Sudash Lishit. In the summer, it's much harder to find a time in space for Melava Malka. This is the fourth meal, which is done after Shabbat. The source is Yari Mikmai in Shabbat, source number 65. The Rambam writes that this is part of Kavod Shabbat. He says, Shabbat, and sets one table after Shabbat. Even just to the kazayit of bread, it's part of the way that we honor Shabbat when it comes in or when it goes out. Means escorting the queen, escorting the Shabbat's queen away. Says the Shulchan Aruch, even though you're not going to be very hungry, and most of us are not very hungry, but even if you're just eating a little bit, that is the Kavod Shabbat. Now, why is it that many people are not makpid to have a Melava Malka? So it may be that people just don't know, but there may be a limit scripture as well. Here it was, I think, in. Have a look at page 234. You have here source number 69. This is something that's much about Kilchata. It says, talk like what is the time that one should have Melava Malka? Like, can you have it the whole night? So different views. He says, talk like Tim Sodat Melava Malka Samuch Letziat Shabbat. Better to have it closer to escorting Shabbat out. Shabbat ended 4 hours ago, and now it seems to make less sense. He says, if you're not hungry immediately after Shabbat, you can delay it afterwards. Don't begin a fixed activity until you've had your Melava Malka. Now he says, mitzvah min hamukar, לקיים mitzvah מלווה מלכה עד סוף 4 שעות בלילה. Best to have it by 4 hours into the night, ודאי לא יאכל אותה עד אחרי חצות הלילה. And best not after חצות. You shouldn't really be eating big meals after xatzot anyway, for other reasons. Okay, and then he says like this, Halkel Sudash Lishit b'Shabbat, u'ma'alich ba'ad chashecha. If we have Sudash Lishit, and we extend Sudash Lishit until after nightfall, which is very common, so then he says, Patur misudar Melava Malka. If the whole point is that you have to eat at the end of Shabbat, you're eating your last meal of Shabbat, and extending that to the end of Shabbat, there are those who say that even in such a case, you're still required to have this meal. So I thought that was an interesting, that may be a reason, and certainly a limit score, but that may be a reason why, if we are having our Sudash Lishit and extending that into nightfall, that may satisfy the requirement of Melava Malka as well. If you're not having Sudash Lishit or Melava Malka, so then that's a problem. You should at least be, you should be having that. Okay, discussion here as well, in terms of whether women are obligated in this or not. Shuk Oletzion brings a number of opinions. Prima Gadim as well, source number 71. He says, if Shah, Nashim Chayavot B'Sudazo, Umil Gamra Oiv Nashim. So they may be obligated, and it's appropriate, even if not obligated, that women should take part in Melava Malka also. Okay, let's just read source number 72 over the page. This is the Machshava piece from the Kaf HaChaim about the importance of eating Melava Malka as well. He says, Sudar Revi'it Achav Dala, Kliyan Iskava, Umatzeret Mibut HaKever. It's a Kabbalistic word. He says that there is a great matter relating to this meal. Hey, we definitely don't need to have lechem mishna for Melava Malka. He says you can't have bread, so you should have mizonot. V'yechaven l'sh'ir bracha b'sudot achol mikdushat HaShabbat. You should have in mind that through this meal, some of the blessing, the holiness of Shabbat, should remain with us for the meals during the week. Okay, so that concludes Shiur 5. That essentially concludes our study. There's always more to talk about. But that is, I think we've had a good overview, a good framework in terms of the Zachor aspect of Shabbat. Kiddush, Havdalah, Seudot Shabbat, Tosefet Shabbat, Sudash Lishit, etc. We're now, from next week, with Rav Hashem, we'll begin the introduction to the Melachot of Shabbat, the Shamor. Now that we know what we can do in Shabbat, let's learn about what we can't do. We'll see how many people stay around for that part. Okay, have a good day, everybody, and have a wonderful week.